Hi, everyone. Again, it's Kim with ALS OC. Welcome to our webinar entitled The POLST Form, What It Is and How to Use It. And we have a wonderful speaker today, our own Patty Mouton, and I will tell you a little bit about her in just a few minutes. As a reminder, this webinar is brought to you by the following sponsors. We have Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, O'Connor Mortuary, Alzheimer's Orange County, Hoag Hospital for this presentation only, and Caring Companions at Home. And as you know, our consortium of sponsors want to present topics that are of interest to anyone who's working with or has a family member that's an older adult. And we hope that today's topic will be very informative for you. Well, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker and tell you a little bit about her. She is Patty Mouton. She's our Vice President of Outreach and Advocacy at Alzheimer's Orange County, where she's been on staff since 2005. In January 2020, Patty also assumed responsibility for the Advanced Care Planning Education Program for the Hoag Hospital Palliative Care Department. Prior to 2005, Patty worked in hospice care for several years and held various leadership positions with American Red Cross Blood Services and in business development with divisions of Johnson & Johnson. She has served as co-chair of the Orange County POLST Coalition, now known as the OC Advanced Care Planning Partners, since 2010. She chairs the CalOptima One Care Connect Advisory Committee and has served on the board of the Sacred Dying Foundation. She currently serves on the Senior Citizens Advisory Council to the Orange County Board of Supervisors, is part of the Leadership Council for the Caring for the Whole Person Initiative at the Orange Catholic Diocese. She serves on the Senior Citizens Commission for the City of Laguna Niguel and serves as chair of the Public Policy Committee of the Orange County Strategic Plan for Aging. She holds a BS in Human Services from Springfield College, graduate certificates in Fundamentals of Gerontology and Palliative Care Chaplaincy, and she is almost she's about to get her master's in gerontology at Cal State Long Beach. She is a clinical POLST educator and is on the End of Life Nursing Education Consortium faculty. So with that, I will turn it over to Patty. Patty, we are just delighted to have you here and look forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Kim. Little known fact, Kim Bailey trained me way back in 2001 when I was a volunteer for the Speakers Bureau at Alzheimer's Orange County. So it's always a pleasure to be able to circle back and work again directly with Kim. I'm really pleased that you're all here today. Use of the POLST document and really enhancing the experience people have as they cope and integrate serious or terminal illness is a real passion of mine, so I appreciate your interest. Why do we need the POLST? Well, too often the patient's wishes when they reach some sort of medical catastrophe or terminal illness maybe aren't known. Maybe they've never had a conversation with their family, or they may not have clearly defined them if they do have an advanced healthcare directive. And the Advanced Healthcare Directive really has a very specific task, and that is mostly to name their agent, their spokesperson, if they can't speak for themselves. It does not truly articulate wishes that are specific to clinical care. So the POLST form is now kind of a step up from what we see in an Advanced Healthcare Directive, creating this opportunity for healthcare providers to not only truly know the person's wishes, but a mechanism by which to honor them in a medical legal form during a health crisis, serious illness, a terminal event, any of those kinds of things which might render the person unable to speak for themselves. Most of you know, hoping that everything is going to go well is not a plan. And the POLST document is really the only, especially out of hospital document, that enables paramedics, first responders, emergency department staff, other healthcare providers. It's the only document that allows people to follow wishes that might include things like do not attempt CPR, do not intubate. Even tattooing it on your chest, it's not legal. I think it's really important for us to frame this discussion with the fact that 50% of us cannot make our own decisions in a medical crisis. And I know that's shocking to a lot of people, but we're either too sick, we maybe have a dementia that's been percolating that now complicates our illness, maybe we're comatose, maybe we've had a head injury if we've been in an accident, but 50% of us cannot participate in medical decisions in the event of a medical crisis. And that's why it's so important to be prepared. Another reason that articulating these wishes in a very specific manner becomes really critically important is person to person to person, we all would define heroic or extraordinary measures differently. If you ask one person, do you want CPR? They're like, oh yeah, they just pound on your chest a little bit and kind of get the heart going again. And they have no conception of what a serious encounter that will be. Someone else thinks, oh no, that's very extraordinary. If my heart has stopped, I'm in cardiac arrest, then I'm dead. Allow me to just march on to heaven. But people don't really have definitions for all of these kinds of care that are universally accepted. The other thing that people don't consider until they're actually in the question is how do we weigh the potential burdens of a treatment versus the potential benefit? This becomes often an ethics discussion, or it's really a values discussion that is best had way upstream from the medical crisis so that people can really think about, well, okay, under this set of circumstances, CPR might be not only acceptable, but desired. But under a whole different set of circumstances, it might not be what somebody wants. So weighing burdens and benefits of treatment and having a realistic view of what treatments can do is also very important. Does the family know the person's wishes? You would be shocked, or many of you already know, that for the most part, unless there has been a very specific, frank discussion, most family members really agonize over what their loved one would want in the event of a crisis where serious decisions have to be made. So we can't assume that our family would know what we want. And then there's the age-old question of if they haven't appointed a surrogate decision maker, a healthcare agent or healthcare proxy. Now, who speaks for them? What happens in that family? The POLST uniquely frames a person's wishes. It was legislated into effectiveness in 2009. We started using it in the field in 2010, and it requires not only a robust conversation, but it requires signature by either the patient or their healthcare agent and a healthcare provider, a physician, a physician's assistant, or a nurse practitioner. So it forces the issue of having a distinct conversation about this patient's needs, wants, values, goals of care, and so forth. It forces that issue, and it ensures, hopefully, if things are done correctly, that the patient or their agent understands all of their choices and the ramifications, and that their doctor or the healthcare provider who is overseeing their care has explained things to them and everybody is very clear. Now, the POLST is not for everyone. And all too often, especially in some care settings, particularly in skilled nursing facilities, we sometimes see that the POLST is given and people are really encouraged, if not really kind of nudged into completing one. The POLST is not for everybody. So for example, if somebody is coming into a skilled nursing facility for rehab after a major arthroplasty, they say they've had their knee replaced. Well, that person, if they're in relatively good health, and we expect them to have a full recovery, then they're not really appropriate for a POLST form. We don't need to know that. We might want to encourage them to be sure they have an advanced healthcare directive, and we might want to have a conversation, but it's not really necessary for that profile patient. It's for people with chronic and progressive serious illness who are very medically frail. Perhaps they're also at very advanced age. And the surprise question really attaches here, because if you see that no one would be surprised if this patient did not live another year, then they're probably appropriate for a POLST. But if you know you would be shocked if this person didn't live through the next year, then they probably don't need a POLST document. And in order for it to be actionable, it must be signed and executed properly. It is not actionable if it is not signed by the patient or their agent, their legally recognized decision maker, and also by a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. Otherwise, it's really not actionable at all. It simply might inform a decision-making process. But that gets really complicated if the POLST is not executed properly. It allows people to make choices in very specific ways. Treatments that they would want, treatments that they do not want. Things like attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And it gives an opportunity for the healthcare practitioner who's going to sign the POLST with this patient to have a discussion about CPR, when it's appropriate, when it's really effective, and when it's not. It allows people to choose whether or not they want a ventilator used, mechanical ventilation, should they have respiratory distress or not be able to breathe on their own, whether or not to administer antibiotics or IV fluids, and under what circumstances, and maybe with some time limits. Medical nutrition, maybe total parenteral nutrition or insertion of a feeding tube surgically. And there's space on the form to add timelines, maybe a trial person. They may have a person who perhaps has an end-stage cancer and might want to be treated for certain infections, but not necessarily put onto a ventilator and go up to the ICU. So it has that opportunity for people in a rich conversation with their providers to tease out what might be acceptable and what they may not want. It is never mandatory. It's a completely voluntary exercise and form, and I think we need to respect that. It's good to have, especially if somebody is seriously ill. It really does provide a great framework for planning goals of care and for looking at care plans and for preparing for what people's needs are. So I'm going to tell a story, and most of you know I don't make these stories up anymore. I've been around so long that all these things have actually happened. But a colleague of mine who was actually a hospice social worker had done her advanced healthcare directive and actually had a POLST form completed because she had had a serious medical issue. And she was in remission, and she and her sisters decided to go on a little vacation, just out to the desert, just a quick 3-day vacation. So they did that. And while they were there, they went shopping, they went to lunch, they were doing all kinds of fun things. They came to an outdoor concrete staircase. And tragically, she had a terrible trip and fall and a serious brain injury when she fell down those stairs. So she's transported by ambulance, 911 comes, and she's transported to the emergency department, and her sisters are just absolutely beside themselves. This is a very serious traumatic brain injury. They get to the hospital. They don't really know what to do. So they intubate her. They did have to do CPR to bring her back. They do all kinds of interventions, but her sisters are standing around saying, we don't know who makes decisions for her. So they called her son, and he said, well, no, she's never discussed any of these things with me. I really don't know what she would find acceptable and what not. Does she have an advance directive? He said, you know, I don't know. I know she has a family trust. Aha, so they know maybe she has completed some of this paperwork. So they're treating her, they're doing all these things to her. She goes up to the ICU. They finally find a card that has her lawyer's name on it. They call the lawyer's office, knowing that she has completed a family trust. Wouldn't you know, the lawyer is fishing in Cabo and can't be reached right away. So once they reach him, which now takes a couple of days because he's been out on the ocean in a boat catching fish, they realize that she wouldn't have wanted any of this. In her advance directive, she has named a colleague, nurse, and social worker to make decisions for her, but she had never spoken with this person about the fact that she had named her as her agent, and she had never discussed her long-term or end-of-life care wishes. So the road to her funeral was a bumpy one for her family because she spent more than a week in ICU getting all kinds of interventions and treatments that clearly she didn't want and that she had opted out of in her POLST form. The critical mistake, leaving all that paperwork with her lawyer, not giving copies to her family, not telling her healthcare agent that she had been named as her proxy decision maker, and not sharing all this with her son and her sisters. They were agonized for better than a week. And think of the excruciating treatments that she went through when there really was no hope of changing the outcome. Very sad. What we didn't know is that she had done all her paperwork ahead of time. She had done all the right things. She just hadn't brought home the copies and distributed them properly. And it doesn't do us any good if everything is in the trust documents and they're not accessible to the family, and we don't know who's been named. So this is a true story, and I'd like us all to avoid the kind of heartache and pain and suffering that maybe we could have mitigated if only we'd known. So her healthcare directive was not discussed with the agent, with her family members. People didn't know that she did not want cardiopulmonary resuscitation attempted, that she didn't want to be intubated. They really didn't know. And so all this overtreatment happened with unnecessary pain and suffering, not only for the patient, but for the family. It happens all the time. What we still have is that an enormous percentage of the Medicare budget is spent on the last 6 weeks of life for people who, if they had a choice, would tell you they wouldn't want this care because, number one, it's not going to change the outcome. But number two, if they had a choice and they knew that they were terminal, they would want to be at home and not have intubation and not have attempts at CPR or cardio defibrillation or all kinds of pressors put in their IV to force that heart to pump. They would want to have a calm, lovely, beautiful death where they're kept comfortable. And the POLST helps us to frame those kinds of goals of care in particular. It also can tell us that this person wants everything done, and so we need to be prepared to do very extraordinary interventions and treatments because that's the patient's choice. So the POLST is really about documenting, framing, and then articulating choice in a way that becomes a medical legal order that first responders, that medical personnel, emergency department staff, that we're all required to honor. It's a portable document that should stay with the patient. But I'll say this a few times, copies are legal. So what we need to do is get people accustomed to putting their POLST on the refrigerator, giving a copy to the hospital to put in their electronic medical record, having a copy for the doctor so that it's in the health group, the health plan electronic medical record, having copies of it for neighbors who might be the ones who would call 911 in the event of an accident. And certainly the person's agent, decision maker should have a copy, and any other family members that would be involved in this discussion. It's bright pink. You can't miss it. It's the most obnoxious pink in the world. It does not have to be on pink paper, but when it is, it's designed to stand out in a stack of other medical papers. It allows this choice, treatments they want to receive, and identify choices for treatment they do not want. And it provides real framework and direction for healthcare providers when there's a serious either medical event or long-term serious illness where the person can't speak for themselves. As I said, this is for people with chronic, progressive illness, serious health conditions, who are medically frail, and for whom no one would be surprised if this patient died within the next year. For anyone else, it's really not necessary. It might not be a bad idea to have a conversation about what's in the POLST, but they really don't need to have it executed unless they fit this criteria. So we know that the POLST works based on data that we collected in the state of Oregon, where it first originated. We know that when over 58,000 deaths were reviewed in this registry, 31% of the people had POLST forms executed. And we can see that it led to patients' wishes being honored, regardless of whether or not they wanted complete full treatment, limited interventions, or comfort measures only. So this framework does work. Pardon me. As I said, it was legislated into being effective in California January of 2009. We have had several iterations of the POLST, and periodically it's reviewed and updated by a statewide task force of clinicians and people in the field who are very knowledgeable about how the POLST is being used. The most recent change, also by legislation, was to enable nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, in addition to physicians, to sign and fully execute the POLST. In California, there's one form for the state. It's important to note that while many states have similar forms, it is not mandatory that each state honor another state's form. So, pardon me, if you have patients that are going to be spending significant time out of state, and they have a POLST in California, and they want to be sure that their wishes are honored wherever they go, you might want to look into the state where they're traveling and get that state's form executed in addition to the POLST in California. You might have some courtesy honoring of patient wishes on a California POLST if you're out of state, but they're not required to do so. Honoring a fully executed POLST in California is mandatory. It has the Emergency Medical Services seal in the top left-hand corner, and it does become a legal medical order once it is properly executed. And it provides some immunity from prosecution for healthcare providers For example, if somebody presents in the emergency department, they have a POLST that says, do not attempt CPR. If that person were to die, this protects the staff, the clinical staff, from being prosecuted for not intervening and trying to prolong that patient's life. So there are some important caveats to use of the POLST. It complements the Advanced Healthcare Directive. It does not replace it. You need both. And everybody over 18 should have an Advanced Healthcare Directive, noting who speaks for them in the event they can't speak for themselves. So the POLST does not replace the Healthcare Directive. It complements it and basically puts the patient's wishes into a form that becomes a legal medical order. A little comparison, the Advanced Directive is for everyone over 18. The POLST is only for those who are seriously ill, frail, but they could be at any age. The Advanced Directive provides general instructions, suggestions for future treatment. The POLST is specific medical orders that could happen this afternoon. The Advanced Directive's primary job is to appoint a decision maker in the event the person cannot speak for themselves. The POLST could be executed by the decision maker. So that shows you what kind of responsibility goes into the hands of the surrogate decision maker. They could go so far as to execute a POLST on behalf of the person for whom they make decisions. The POLST is really the most important part of the POLST are the conversations that take place. The opportunity for people to talk about these levels of care, talk about what the outcomes might be, talk about what it would mean for them in their clinical situation, and then to execute what their wishes are. So this continuum of care that rests on conversation starts with an Advanced Directive. You have to update it periodically if you get married, if you move, if your condition changes. If you're diagnosed with a serious chronic progressive illness at any age, then it may be important to complete a POLST form, and then it sets up this paradigm for your wishes to be followed. There are some other forms that sometimes people get confused about. Some people have had a pre-hospital DNR, do not resuscitate order. Not as many people are using them now that the POLST is so readily available. But this form has some limitations, the pre-hospital DNR. So it would only be honored outside the hospital. It's not universal. It only applies to CPR, attempted resuscitation. And it's really kind of an awkward form. So we don't recommend it if we can get people to complete a POLST. The POLST is honored across all healthcare settings, and it's designed to be portable. So it should go with the patient wherever they are. It should be in their electronic medical record. Sometimes people even have a screenshot on their phone that they can show people. But it allows for an integration of medical treatments, but clearly articulating if there's cardiac arrest, does the person want CPR attempted or not? If they want CPR attempted, then they go to full treatment. If they don't want CPR attempted, then maybe they can articulate that they don't want mechanical ventilation or intubation. They don't want artificial fluids. So it gives people those options. In California, there is one POLST form, and I'll say this probably 15 times. It's a medical legal order. It's not a suggestion for care. It's not a wish for future care. It's a legal order that could be effective today. And it should be honored wherever the patient is in any healthcare setting. The PIC form, preferred intensity of care, is something that we see practically only in skilled nursing facilities. And again, the PIC is different in every SNF. So it's not universal. It can't transfer with the patient. It would have no authority outside of that building. It's not really a medical order. It's more of a note or a suggestion. So the PIC doesn't replace the POLST. And oftentimes we get confused that if they have a PIC, they don't need a POLST. Well, I think you need to evaluate that based on the patient's condition and what their wishes are. So to expand upon the PIC form, both the PIC and the POLST include choices for medical intervention, but the POLST can replace this preferred intensity of care form at a skilled nursing facility. The POLST is always voluntary. So keep that in mind, and it's really not appropriate to be given to someone who doesn't fit the criteria of having a serious, chronic, progressive illness, or for whom no one would be surprised if they died within the next year. This is what it looks like, and you all have been given a copy to download. If anybody needs to have a few POLST forms, I'm going to say you can contact me. You can get in touch with me through Alzheimer's Orange County, and we'll send you a few to keep on hand. We have some grant funding that allows us to have a few forms to be able to give out, certainly when we give education classes, but also if somebody needs one and they can't get to their doctor's office or over to a hospital to get a hold of one, we're happy to share. This is what the back of the form looks like. I think it's important to note the different sections, and we're going to go through some of them chapter and verse, but it's really important to understand section A, B, C, and D have very specific roles in the completion of the form. And then the back of the form is with whom the patient has spoken to complete it, and making sure that all of these criteria are followed so that people are not coerced or convinced to complete a POLST form if it's not necessary. So really important that we get the patient's name correctly, that we know the date that the form is prepared. This is critically important because maybe the patient has a change in condition and a subsequent POLST form might be completed with new preferences for care. So we always honor the most recent form, and you can change your mind for what you indicate on your POLST form. So the date is critically important, as is the date of birth and medical record number if you have it, just to be sure that we're talking about the right person. Section A has one job. Does the person want us to attempt CPR if they are in arrest, or do they not want us to attempt CPR and therefore to allow natural death? This is a big decision, and it really is critical to filling out the rest of the POLST, because if we are going to attempt CPR, we're not going to just get that heart started and then just leave them alone. We're going to do, all cardiac life support. So people need to understand that if they say they want us to attempt CPR, they are opting in for all levels of care after that in order to assure that if we can keep them alive, we do. If we do not attempt CPR, then they have choices about whatever levels of care they want us to intervene with, should they stay alive, should their heart keep beating. So if you have CPR, you have to have full treatment, because we wouldn't just get that heart going and then leave you there. If you have a do not resuscitate option checked, then you can say you want full treatment, you want selective treatment, or you want only comfort-focused treatment. And you can specify certain timelines as well. So full treatment is advanced cardiac life support. We're going to use intubation, mechanical ventilation, cardioversion as indicated. That's full treatment. Now, you can say, attempt CPR, I want full treatment, but for a trial period of time, maybe for a week. And if I can't breathe on my own, and if I can't sustain life on my own, then allow me to have a natural death. People can specify a short period of time for trial of this treatment. You can opt for selective treatment, pardon me, which would be avoiding what you would consider some burdensome measures. So it would be focused on comfort, but we might also use IV antibiotics. We might use IV fluids, but we probably would not intubate. And we might use positive airway pressure, a CPAP machine. And generally speaking, if people choose selective treatment, they want to avoid going back to the ICU. And this is where people can request transfer to the hospital only when their comfort needs can't be met. So maybe they're not ready for hospice. They're in a board and care home. They don't want to ping pong back and forth to the hospital. They could select this option of selective treatment, and we do everything we could in that care setting, legally in that care setting, but we wouldn't transfer them to the hospital unless it was truly a comfort pain issue. And then there's purely comfort-focused treatment, which would be palliative care, hospice care, looking only to relieve pain and suffering by any route, use of oxygen, use of morphine, perhaps some suctioning, some manual treatment of airway obstruction, but treatments that would not require being sent back to the hospital. And only go back to the hospital if we couldn't meet their comfort needs, if there was some sort of a pain crisis. And in this section, you could also give some trial times too. You could say things like, maybe I could use the BiPAP machine for a week, see if it helps me. And if not, then just focus on my comfort. And then section C is to cover choices about artificially administered nutrition. People sometimes need short-term support, maybe a little total parenteral nutrition in an IV, maybe a feeding tube for a short period of time. I use the example, if I had esophageal cancer and I was having surgery and chemo and radiation and I couldn't eat for a period of a few months, well then sure, put in a feeding tube. Let me get well from this phase of treatment, and then we'll see. But if I am end-stage Alzheimer's disease, for example, and I can no longer remember how to swallow because my brain function has declined so severely, don't put a feeding tube in me, because that feeding tube is just going to deliver nutrient product that my body can't use. And the fact that my body is slowing down and telling everyone who's caring for me that it really can't receive that nutrition because I can't swallow safely, that's an indicator that Mother Nature is telling us something. So it becomes a personal decision of how people want their care plans set up, but it really does help us with the goals of care conversation, because then people can ask serious questions and really understand what some of these interventions can and cannot do. This is not just a checkbox form. As you can probably well imagine, you probably have a lot of questions swirling in your mind. You probably have a lot of patients and families that you're thinking about. This is a complicated conversation, and oftentimes it's not one or two conversations that allows the POLST form to be completed. It's a series of conversations, but it provides context so that people do understand what their choices mean, and it helps people then clearly identify what goals of treatment are important and what are reasonable, because sometimes people might not really understand the severity of their illness until we have a very detailed, frank conversation. Then section D is very important. It's for the signatures. So the person who's going to sign this, the healthcare provider, physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant indicates that they have had this discussion, indicates what they have discussed. Then if the healthcare agent is named and we know who that is, we put them here. Sometimes we've discussed this with this legally recognized decision maker. Sometimes we've discussed it with the patient. We want to indicate that. Then print the clinical professional's name. We want their contact information in case there's ever a question. We want their license number. Their signature and the date is very important. And then either the patient or their legally recognized decision maker then signs here. This is what then makes the POLST form actionable. So who speaks for a patient that can't speak for themselves? Well, their legally recognized decision maker, the person who is noted in their advanced healthcare directive. If there is no advanced healthcare directive, then it could be a parent, it could be a registered domestic partner, it could be a guardian or a conservator, it could be the closest available relative. There's no true hierarchy of surrogate decision makers in California law. So where this can get problematic is, let's say you have a 23-year-old college student who's living with their significant other and they've been madly in love for 6 whole weeks. If there's some sort of a medical crisis, then that significant other, even if they're not registered as a domestic partner, could end up being the person who's making decisions for them in the emergency department. And I don't know about you, but I raised teenagers, and some of them even at 23, they weren't ready to be making life and death decisions. So we want to be careful. HIPAA allows disclosure. So we want to be sure that we have the patient information here absolutely pristinely, because we want to release this information as appropriate so that the person's wishes can be transferred from care setting to care setting. And we want to follow the directions on the back. Now I'm going to issue a little caveat. I don't believe any healthcare professional should have a POLST discussion with a patient or family unless they've had some very specific POLST conversation training. But in a pinch, these directions will walk you through and will give you at least enough information to get the conversation underway. You do have to complete it. And if any area on the POLST is not completed properly or is done incorrectly, then it renders the POLST useless. We can't action, it's not actionable if it's not correctly filled out. We do recommend that any of these documents, but especially a POLST, be reviewed at least every 5 years, or certainly when there's a change in the patient's condition, where they live, marital status, anything like that. The POLST can be voided and we can issue a new one. We don't want to be making changes on a POLST. That nullifies it if there's crossouts and changes or a change of date or something else on there, then it becomes useless. So we do want to modify it. And one of the best ways you can ensure that people know there was an older POLST is to have a copy of it stapled to the newly executed POLST. So we want to review anytime there's a change in preferences, major life event, change of care venue, change in condition, but at least every 5 years. And these are the people that can help someone complete a POLST. Again, they need to have specialty training to have a POLST conversation. But it's not something for somebody that you just hired who's maybe doing concierge duty in an assisted living and, oh, by the way, get people to fill out this form. This is a really specialized form. Patients with capacity can change their POLST. They can request alternative treatments. They can revoke the POLST at any time. The legally recognized decision maker may also do the same. They have that responsibility and authority. The original should stay with the patient. It should be magneted on their refrigerator if they're at home. Copies should be distributed everywhere: the hospital, the doctor's office, the skilled nursing facility, wherever the patient is going to reside. And then copies should be given to family members, and certainly to the healthcare agent recognized in the Advanced Healthcare Directive. It can be photocopied. If you want to put it on the cardstock, it's called Ultra Pink, and they recommend using 65-pound cardstock. Faxes and copies on any color paper are acceptable and legally recognized. And it's so much more than a form. This is an opportunity for an in-depth conversation about the patient's wishes, their goals of treatment, and their understanding of their disease. And it incorporates a very strong sentiment of the importance of keeping people comfortable. You can get more information. You can look into some of the classes about having the POLST conversation through the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California. They are the folks in Sacramento who brought the POLST to California and orchestrate its use. And that's where I have done all of my training. But this group, the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California, they are not at all related to any of the assisted suicide or euthanasia people. They are an advocacy group, and they provide a great deal of education. We are your local POLST coalition, chartered by the Coalition for Compassionate Care, and we've received support from SCAN, from California Healthcare Foundation. Alzheimer's Orange County has been kind of a mainstay with our partnerships that have led to the Orange County Advanced Care Planning Partners, and we operate under the auspices of the Aging Services Collaborative with tremendous support and direct collaboration with the Hoag Palliative Care Department. So this whole project is to translate people's wishes for care during a serious or chronic illness episode, and to learn their preferences and then provide a legal medical order process to follow those wishes. It means it has to be a rich conversation with each patient. It's a standardized form. It promotes excellence in conversational skills between the clinical professionals and the families, and it integrates POLST into this community standard of care. You can get POLST forms. As I said, I can send you a few. You can order them yourselves. You can download the form and then order paper and print it yourself. Just remember to do both sides, because otherwise it's not actionable. And there are many resources through both Alzheimer's Orange County and through the Coalition for Compassionate Care. And really, you just have to let us know what you want and need, and we'll do our best to meet those needs, or if you want some in-servicing on site. So I so appreciate your interest and your participation today, and I hope this has been of some help and opened up some new doors of information for you regarding the POLST document. Thank you.
Well done, Patty, and don't go anywhere because we have a number of questions for you. But before we do go to the questions, just a couple of announcements. One is that we did attach the POLST form to the control panel in the handouts. So you can print them off while we're talking right now. Just click on them and they'll load and you can print them. The other thing I want to remind everything about is the importance of being aware of implicit biases, or another way of framing that is unconscious stereotypes as we're caring for others. A best practice is a person-centered approach where we view each person that we care for as an individual with unique needs and preferences. We treat them with dignity and respect, even when they are very different from ourselves. If we always listen carefully and respectfully so that we understand their perspectives and their values, etc., then we know we can build trust and provide the very highest quality of care. And that statement is particularly true for our topic today. So now I hope you're writing your questions in the chat box. Before we do that, one more thing. If we run past 12:30, you're welcome to remain online to ask your question or to listen to the answers. But if you need to leave the webinar, you can. Just remember that if you're requesting a CE, you have to make sure you have been online with us for 60 minutes. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors once again: O'Connor Mortuary, Caring Companions at Home, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, Hoag Hospital, and Alzheimer's Orange County. And we really appreciate their support for this wonderful webinar series. So next month, I hope you'll tune in. We have someone from O'Connor Mortuary, our favorite, Becky Lamaka. She's spoken to us before. She's going to come back and talk about grief, but this time it's going to be specific to dementia. So grief through the stages of dementia. That, make sure you mark your calendars for that. That's Tuesday, May 10th. Okay, I think I did all my announcements. Oh, if you leave before the webinar ends, you won't get a pop-up evaluation, but you will get that in email, and make sure that you submit that within 24 hours. Okay, with that, let me open up the question box.
Kim, would you like any assistance?
Yeah, you know what? Every once in a while, I'm not able to open up that question box. So why don't you go ahead and ask Patty the questions? That would be great. Thank you, Michelle.
Sure will. Okay, so here we go. Here's the first one. Marie asked, would spinal stenosis and Alzheimer's be considered a serious illness and or medically frail, as other than these two issues, they are in good health, or would the advance directive be sufficient?
Well, that's a really great question. If the person still has capacity to make decisions, they're in an early stage of their Alzheimer's disease, then I would say yes, have the conversation with them, because then at least we're very well aware of their treatment goals and they can weigh in and be part of this conversation. You would want to be talking with the patient's doctor kind of all along the way. But if you had the opportunity to discuss with someone while they still had capacity, then that would be ideal.
All right, next question. Will this help if I'm traveling out of California or the USA?
Well, it will help, but just know that the California POLST document is really only valid in the state of California. It might inform the process if you were elsewhere, but they're not required to follow your wishes.
Michelle, I can take over now. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you for your assistance.
Sure.
My mom has early to early moderate dementia, says one of our attendees. And they just asked her doctor if a POLST would be appropriate, and the doctor said yes. However, mom doesn't meet the test of the surprise question. You also mentioned it's better to put it in place sooner or upstream, so she's a little confused. Should she do the POLST now or not?
Well, if your mother still has some capacity to articulate her wishes, then I would say start the conversation. And if she is not in full capacity enough to be able to sign the document on her own, if you are her legal decision maker, you could sign it. In dementia, it becomes a little bit of a gray area, because we really do want people to have the opportunity to weigh in with their wishes while they have capacity. And it may be earlier than necessary, but this would be a conversation with your physician, with your loved one who has dementia, and to really get an idea of what their wishes are. And then you could do it a little bit early when dementia is part of the equation.
Thank you, Patty. This is a great question. What happens if the power of attorney or decision maker demands treatment which is contrary to what is stated on the POLST or advance directive?
That is a problem. It's a great question, and I'm sure it happens much more often than we even realize. The decision maker, especially if they're listed in the Advanced Healthcare Directive, has that authority to subvert what's on the POLST and to make changes in the care treatment plan if they have good reason to do so. So we want to be sure that whomever is asked to be in the decision-making capacity, to be the healthcare proxy, knows what the patient's wishes are, understands all the clinical implications, and then could make decisions in that person's best interests. Perhaps there's been a change in condition that no one anticipated, and perhaps CPR is indicated for a short period, to try it under certain circumstances. Perhaps having a feeding tube on a trial basis is appropriate for this patient under certain circumstances. So that's why it's so important to know that whomever is named as the decision maker is very much in alignment with what the patient's wishes are. But they do have the authority to void the POLST, to enact a new POLST, and to change care decisions.
Yeah, it reminds me too of the case study you were talking about. I mean, sometimes it's better to choose someone who's not a relative or not as emotionally invested in, so that you can really be sure that they will carry out the wishes that you've dictated. So
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, what happens? Oh, can you have both the Advanced Care Directive and the POLST?
Yes, and you should. They are complementary documents. And if you really don't want one without the other, unless you're not quite appropriate for a POLST yet. So for example, I'm going to be 66 tomorrow. I have an Advanced Healthcare Directive, but I'm in good health. I don't have a POLST. Fast forward 20 years, I might still be in pretty good health, but I'll be 86. So a POLST would probably be appropriate for me.
Good. Thank you, Patty. This attendee says, I thought the Q meant oh, I'm sorry. She's referring to the poll question.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's not for you. My mom has a POLST that states trial period for everything. She now has dementia and progressive health issues. I think she may now wish for DNR in certain situations, but not all. You stated the POLST is a legal order. Does that mean as the advance directive order person, I cannot state DNR in the moment because the POLST states otherwise? Okay, that was kind of long.
That's a complicated but good question. So if I understand it correctly, the question is being asked by someone who has power of attorney for healthcare for her mother. Her mother initially wanted a trial period for everything when she was not quite so ill with her dementia. Now that her dementia has advanced, her other clinical conditions have gotten worse, and the daughter now believes that it would be appropriate to change the POLST and have it be do not attempt CPR. If I've understood the question correctly, as the power of attorney for healthcare, you can revoke the initial POLST and execute a new one. You would want to consider your mother's wishes. You would want to consider everything that was in her very best interests, have a conversation with her doctor, and ensure you were doing everything for all the right reasons. But you do have that authority.
Good. Thank you, Patty. We have time just for a couple more. So obviously these are physician's orders, so you have to name a physician. Our attendee says that doctors change like you change your underwear. So why do I have to fill in a name which might expire in 6 months? And I don't think she meant literally expire.
Right. We hope the doctor doesn't expire.
So does it matter what doctor's on there?
It really doesn't matter which physician is listed, so long as we could reach him or her if in the clinical setting there was a question. So
Okay.
that doctor who's on the POLST is not going to be the one who then is called on for medical decisions later. It's going to be the attending physician in the hospital. It's going to be the medical director at the skilled nursing facility. It's going to be the person's primary care physician. But you do have to have a clinical professional, physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner sign and execute the POLST to ensure that there has been an appropriate clinical conversation and that the patient or the person signing for the patient clearly understands the implications of the choices.
Great, thank you. Patty, I should say that you're getting many accolades in the question, but they're not questions, they're comments about how wonderful your presentation is, and we will share those with you later.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Someone else also wanted us to remind everyone that these documents, the name for them can vary from state to state.
Correct.
So in some states, it's medical orders for life-sustaining treatment, so it's the
Right.
MOLST instead of the POLST.
Right. Sometimes it's just physician orders, and they call it a POST document, a MOST document, a MOLST, and a POLST. We're working on a national paradigm so that across the country there would be a little more standardization, and I hope that'll come in the next couple of years.
That would be great. A couple of you asked about downloadable versus hard copy, and as Patty explained, you can print them, you can print them off on white paper, or you can buy the pink heavy stock paper, but just so
Right.
you have it, it's fine. So you don't have to necessarily purchase it. What if you want to revoke it, Patty?
If you want to revoke it, you want to write clearly on the POLST that you're revoking, write void, and I would make copies of that voided document and distribute them wherever you have put the original POLST. So I would take it to the hospital so that they can void out what's in the electronic medical record, to the doctor's office. Make sure that if you've given copies to other family members or the neighbor across the street, those are important places to make sure they know that that original POLST has been voided. And then you should execute a new POLST with the patient's current wishes. Staple the old revoked POLST to the back of it, so that if along the way, along care settings, someone comes across a previously executed POLST, they'll know by the date and they'll see the copy of the voided POLST, so they know to use the one with the most current date. And that's what the determining factor is. If you filled one out 4 days ago and now have changed your mind and do a new one, the POLST with the most recent date is what's going to be followed.
Okay, great. One more question. And Patty, can you restore your screen? We lost that last slide.
I
It's no
don't.
big deal. If you can't, don't worry. It's
Here we
I think
go. Can you see that?
Yeah, and then just expand it. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure.
Just so people have the number of our helpline, if you have additional questions or come up with some thoughts or want to share or talk about your personal situation with someone, please do call the helpline, and the number is right there on the screen. So one more question. Does a legally recognized decision maker need to provide some kind of documentation of their authority when signing the POLST as an agent, or someone can just sign it freely?
Well, now that's a really excellent question. Ideally, you would have the Advanced Healthcare Directive that names you as the legally recognized decision maker. That's ideal.
Okay.
If that didn't exist and no Advanced Healthcare Directive was executed, then the doctors in the clinical situation are going to look to who's the closest relative, who's in charge, who speaks for this person. It becomes a little less clear, and it could open up some problems down the line, because there's no absolute hierarchy of surrogacy in California. So before you sign a POLST for somebody, you better make sure that you can make decisions for them, especially if you're not named in an advanced healthcare directive. So that's why the advanced directive is so important.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Patty, we're going to have to wrap things up, but I just want to tell you that, you know, you're one of our most popular speakers, and you've had it's been a really valuable presentation today, lots of great information. And as I said, the POLST form is attached. It's that first handout, so don't miss your opportunity to download that now. Want to thank our sponsors once again. They're so wonderful, and remind you of next month's topic, which is grief through the stages of dementia. Another very popular speaker will be with us, Miss Becky Lamacco. So as I close out this the session today, your evaluation will pop up. Please take a minute now to fill that out, and if you don't, you'll also get the opportunity to do that via email, but we need that back in 24 hours so that we can process your certificates. So, and then finally, for information about our other education that we offer, please visit our website. It's www.alzoc.org. There is so much great information there, and we are anxious to share it with you. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and we've been providing these services for all that time for our families as well as the professional community. So take advantage of the resources that we have by calling the helpline and by visiting our website and looking at past webinars of, we have the videos all listed there, as well as our classes for families. So thanks again to you, Patty, and thanks to all of our attendees, and we'll see you next month for Grief Through the Stages of Dementia. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.